This is the 12th appendix on the principles of ancient alphabet letters. In a sense, I've given you the preview in the book proper, namely in the introduction. I showed you that there was a very old method of letter making around 6000 BC with the Armenians and with the Chechens, where I take a symbol and shift it 45 degrees and then again by 90 degrees, then again 90 degrees, so that I have it at all the points of the compass. And then I rearrange that in rows and create an alphabet. In chapter 4, I showed you that we can use the principle of creating grids and use that to make alphabets. And I'll come back to that at the end of the thing. But I want to show you now some of the, and I talked in the chapter on the heavens that there was a link with the heavens in making stars. But I want to now get the bigger picture and draw some of these multiple strands together in some unexpected ways. So here are two pictures of a Milky Way spiral that is called by the Russians Svati. And what's fascinating is that if you go to some of the Indian sources, you will see that this Milky Way Swati is called Shishumara, and that all of these funny little names here are names of gods. And if you go to Russia, you will see this symbol, which is the source of all, as it's called. Well, that becomes extremely interesting because in the most modern versions of what we know as the Milky Way, there are 4 arms. There's a galactic center, there's Norma, Crux, Carina Sagittarius, and this one. And what do we have in the Indian high-level mystic approaches? We have a 9 by 9, an 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 9 by 9 grid with all the gods or with a number of gods. And then we see here 4 lines. And if we look more closely, we see that there is a square here in a first set of squares. So a 4 by 4 is Brahma Viti. Then we have Deva Viti, Manusha Viti, and Pishkaza Viti. Here is another version, and here is a modern drawing of these 4 arms. So now these 4 arms are really quite modern in astronomy, and yet both the ancient Russians and the ancient Hindus, in some way that is unexplained, must have known about them. So here are 3 ancient Russian symbols: Svati, Ishtok, which also means root, like Mula, and here Navnik, written also in Cyrillic. And this is the celestial all, or Alternik. This is Rizich. Here is Rizich in a temple, or in Mausheim in Israel. And here you see it in Shavi Zion. So here's a detail, and here you see the whole floor is covered with this symbol. We saw this one before in the introduction, the 4 arms of the swastika, which can relate to the 4 rivers in Turkey and can link to the Hungarian Easter egg. Now in the Russian, in the last lecture I showed you the associations of the numbers 1 to 576. Well, the 4 has a particular role in the Slavic world because it's the four worlds, the four corners of a square, the four dots, the four corners of a square, the fourfold spiral, the four great peoples, the four letters, the four-level structure of the world, the four northern constellations, the four northern rivers, the four phases of the day, phases of the moon, prime elements, runes, sides of light, spoked wheel, steps of existence, types of sacred art, and four winds. And in fact, in both the Slavic world and the Hindu world, the swastika is much more than just, well, it is a symbol. It's a symbol going back, as we saw, to the Zhangzong dynasty, where it is Yung and Drung, the two phases of the year, the sun and the moon phase, the light and the dark phase, and a cyclical symbolism implied. But it is also an ordering system for the cosmos. So here's a meditation swastika. Here is a creation swastika. Here is a Ganesh yantra with that creation swastika in the center. So four directions and four dots and so on. And it links up with a swastika asana. So now it's the human being that is the swastika. And in the medieval sketchbook of a man called Viard de Honcourt, we find a fourfold man. And then in the medieval manuscripts, we find a four-footed figure, literally. We also saw a three-footed figure as a symbol for Sicily. But we can have a two-footed figure, a three-footed figure, and a four-footed figure. A Zweifuß, a Dreifuß, and a Vierfuß, if we use the German. Now, all of this would be of peripheral interest to our story if it was not intimately connected with the tradition of letter making. So I can take the swastika and put it in my magic square of 9, and then I go 1, 5, 9, 2, 7. Well, I can do just 1, 5, 9, or I can go 6, 1, 5, 9, 4, and 2, 7, 5, 3, 8. Here's another way of doing it. I can highlight those. Then I can put those in relation to the Zephirot. And this becomes the crown, this becomes a dot, and this becomes a swastika. Or I can do the ones with the letters, and then link 1, 3, 5, 7, so the uneven numbers. And what do I get? I get a Slovo in that alphabet of the Russians, looking like the Sanskrit letters. And Slovo means a word or a letter. And if I combine 2, 4, 6, 8, I get a backward Z, which is the letter H in certain contexts. Or I can use the trigrams and link those in a 3 by 3 square and inscribe in those forward and backward ones. Or I can then put forward and backward ones in this kind of thing. And if I look now very closely at these strange symbols, remember we talked about figure and ground, and now you see that we have a backward H here, which of course is also a Sanskrit letter if you turn it around. And here you have backward Fs if you're looking at the ground. And if you look at the figure, then you have this swastika-like figure. And here you have Facebook again, reversed, and so on. And here you have that Otela sign that is now looking like a fish. Or now I can take that symbol and add, well, it's that symbol entirely, but just cut off there, and then do that 4 times, and I have this, which I can then recombine with this one. What I'm saying is that symbols which I think of as linked with one country, namely trigrams with China, or this symbol linked with Russia, in the Russian tradition combines these two things. And so that what we really need are special glasses to see, oh, if I was Arabic, I would be looking at it this way, or Muslim. If I'm looking Chinese, I would be looking at it this way. If I'm Russian, I would be looking at it this way. And we have, of course, the story of how we go from a dot to, from a circle to a circle with a dot, to a yin-yang this way, to a yin-yang in the familiar way, and then to the 10,000 things, which, as we recall, is linked with the number 37 if we do the gematria. And that then leads, first of all, Wuji to Daiji to Yin-Yang, greater yin, lesser yang, lesser yin, greater yang, and then the 8 trigrams. Linked then to the mother, youngest son, middle son, eldest son, middle daughter, youngest daughter, father. Now, just for fun, I'm teaching you to look globally. Here is Karuna 138, Voda, not linked with Vodafone. It means Vodafone got it from voice over direct access, but here it means Voda, meaning water. So we have a water version, and we have a yang sign. And here, now when at the 2 level, so I have, this is the becoming yang, and this is the becoming yin, and the 2 in between. Now in basic Daiji poses, each of those is a pose. So here now we have the trigrams that become poses, and in fact we can take the whole of the alphabet. So here are the basic 15 postures of Qigong and the 29 postures of Yi Yi Ying. And this Ying, of course, if I add the north, the figure for the north gives me Bei Ying. And if I do the south, then I get Nan Ying. And so I get the capital of the north and the capital of the south. So I can take the yin-yang, I can turn that around just the way that I do the swastikas. And then there are versions where I can do that whole thing with hands. And so the yin-yang is not just some symbol, that can also be a symbol of the god Ra in Egypt, but now is a series of symbols linking the motions of the hands, of the year, and so on. And of course I can relate that back to the I Ching as a Yi circle or a Yi globe. And then I can take that, inscribe it in the yin-yang, and now link the trigrams about it, and then abstract that and get this kind of figure, or do the same here and that, and get that kind of figure. Or I can do it in terms of black and white and start with the feminine and the masculine and go up until I get this. Or I can arrange that or in terms of the 4 points of the compass and get that. Or I can start with the 2 elementary forms and go here and get that. And then I can do that in a 3D version as isometric cubes. Or I can arrange them as 64 cubes, 64 hexagrams. And now, and if I now take a line from 1 to 64, what sequence do I get? 1, 10, 19, 28, 37, 46, 55, 64. Does this sound familiar? Yes, because it is the 11019 of the nakshatras. It is the 11019 of the oracle of Zoroaster. It's the 11019 that becomes part of the spirits and the gods of Zoroastrianism. And here we see that it is hidden within the 64 hexagrams of the Chinese. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how I got there, but there is a kind of hidden global set of meaning that until we learn to put on special glasses to look at China, Iran, Russia, and India, not as fighting countries, but as part of a collective unconscious, would be the word of Carl Gustav Jung, but this is a collective conscious because they actually knew what they were doing, otherwise they wouldn't have reached these numbers. So there is a lost, Dan Brown writes about the lost symbol, but this is a lost symbol making exercise that that is somehow there and which we need to work on together to figure out and to remember what we had in common. Now, I can't go into all the details of the next slides, but again, just to give you glimpses of what that looks like. I showed you the 9 squares, which becomes then 9 numbers, and I can take those in the Chinese version, and I link 1 and 6, 2 and 7, 3 and 8, and 4 and 9 with 5 in the middle. So I can do it this way, and I can do it that way. Then I can twist them, and so on. And this becomes the low shoe figure. So it becomes the numbers on the back of a turtle. Here I see that same set of combinations. So 1, 6, 2, 7, 3, 8, 4, 9. And these are also combinations of letters. So letter A and letter F have a link. Remember that F is the maximum power, and that sometimes it's written backwards, so 6, 1, so Fa or Fei or Feihu. Now I link 1, 9, 3, 7, and I have a cross. I link the diagonals and I get 4, 6, and 2, 3. I put them together and I get this figure. I then combine them in another way and I get a backward swastika with the cross and the St. Peter's cross that way. And I go to Patan and I see that symbol on a temple reversed. So the letter making, the number making, the geometry making, and the symbol making are not all 4 different things. They are all part of the same universe. And so in the Chinese system, I can take these same numbers with 5 and 10 in the center, 1 and 6, 2, 7, 3, 8, 4, 9. I can arrange them this way. So 1, 2 this way, 6, 7 that way, and so on. I can put them on the back of a dragon. I can take this set and put them on the back of a turtle. And I have the basics of Chinese cosmology. So in a sense, one could give a few hours lectures just on this page, because here we have an integration of number, of dots, and pictures, geometry, arithmetic, and writing. This is the world of the earlier heaven, as it's called, or the unchanging world. It's the world that we have at creation. And this is the world of later heaven, when we have descended into time and when there is change. Now, the recent studies of the Chinese scholars has shown that we can take those same 2 and then look at them in another way, and now this becomes a map of the human body. And so this is key and embryology, as it's called. So now the man is along that axis, and I have a frontal view, and so these points also then become organs within the body and give me a glimpse also of the chakras. And so we have to be very trained to see that, because I must confess I looked at that for dozens of years and just saw a number of dots and lines. However, here are other pictures of those things, and we see these curious energy symbols. Here's another one. And that seems very strange until we understand that underlying principle. But then we go to Russia. Remember our church where we had the cross with this way, and then below it went that way. And then we saw that in the church at Bogdanov, we had one going upwards and the other going downwards. And that there were letters of the Russian alphabet here, these two letters, where the one has an energy level going down and the other has an energy level going up. And so, although it looks as if it's just curious lines, there is a hidden meaning where this is again energy levels, and where the energy version of the letters of the Russian alphabet, remember there were mudras for each letter, but there were also energy levels, that there is some complex way in which these energy levels of the Russians are linked with what's called the ki, or the energy in the Chinese tradition. And they spell it QI, but if we go back to the Sumerians, they have that human being with the energy levels creating a swastika, and there the ki is spelled not QI but KI. So again, we are back at this underlying Eurasian notion of cosmic ideas that are expressed differently, even drawn differently, and yet somehow are feeding from a common set of values. And that applies especially to the swastika. So we all learned the Pythagorean theorem. The square on the hypotenuse is equal to the square on the other two sides. Well, as I say, we all know that, but look at this one. Now we add, so this is Saturn in the west, this is Jupiter, and in this one we have another planet, and what do we have inside? We have the sun. This is the Father, the Son, and the Father, the Mother, and Jupiter, and the child, now called Horus. So Horus is not just a conceptual birth, now it's a geometrical birth. And that swastika can then be linked to a 5x5 square, and here we see various versions, which can then be linked with 25 letters. Or I can link it with specific combinations of in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4 quadrograms rather than trigrams, because there's 4 lines rather than 3. Or I can put the zodiac into this, or I can do numbers linked with this, so that I get 13, 1, 19, 2, 15, and so on. And now life gets interesting, because when I go to these martial arts of the Chinese, what do I get? I get the Pume Pio and the Manjari Shuriken. I get a swastika that defines the motions of the body in a particular set of exercises. And here's another one. It's called Ilyo. And so now a mudra is not just about a particular hand or even a single body position, but a set of body positions which then defines a whole swastika. And so the swastika is on the one hand just a symbol, but it is also a grid for creating a series of mudras or mantras or yantras. Or I can do a minimal version and make this Japanese symbol. Or I can have 8 spokes, and that can be the 8 rays of heaven, which can also be a 6 rays for the atmosphere, also drawn this way. And then I can have 4 colored klim bijas in the form of a swastika. And the swastika then becomes not just all the things we've said so far, but becomes a way of organizing the world. So I can have the 4 realms of existence, the celestial, the devata or devata, the human, the manusya, the animals and plants, the tiryank, and the hell, naraki. Or I can link this with 4 states, the ego conditioning, the emanation, the ego conditioning, the consciousness evolution, and the dissolution. Or I can link this with 4 gods, Vishnu, Indra, Sun, and Brihaspati, and Sharavan, Chitra, Pushya, and Revati. Or here with the directions, or here with Artha, Kama, Moksha, Dharma, and then reverse that, and then link it with gods, Brahmacharya, and so on. And so, or I can take this one and link it back to that swirling 4 of the cosmos, the cross, and then the backward one. Here I have my Yungdrung. Here I have a Russian version of the Yungdrung relating to other geometrical versions. Here I have another Russian Yungdrung, but now as part of the 144 letters. Here I have the 2 letters Posilon and swastika in a Russian alphabet. Then I take these 2 symbols as the Inglia rune and the Mara rune. I make them this way, and they're just the backward and forward swastikas. I go to Greece, and I link this one to the female and this one to the male, creating different kinds of meander patterns. I combine them to create the cosmic egg and then put them together here in ionic column. Or I get this as the left turning, this as the right turning, linking to the equinoxes. Or I get this as the Omoto Manji and the Ura Manji. I'm in China, in Japan now. Or here as evolution and involution as Pavriti and Nivriti. And I'm back in India. So, ladies and gentlemen, the swastika is a letter, is a geometrical form. It's a geometrical structure that is like a grid. And from that grid, I can then have individual letters like this, but I can use it as a grid for making all the letters of Armenian, or I can use it to make Roman brooches. Or I can take 4 versions of the Big Dipper and create this, create that, create that. The symbol, this is the giant swastika that is also called the creation swastika. And then we see here that it is also a symbol of existence. And in the old, now we're talking about the very old Russian astronomy, we have the Big Dipper, but near the Big Dipper is a swastika set of stars. For politically correct reasons, that's now been left out of modern astronomy. But it's there in the old one. And if I go to the old Indian astronomy, there is also a swastika in the sky. again, completely forgotten about in these politically correct days. But that does not erase the extraordinary heritage that's behind this. Now, if I go to Russia, there's a man in 2001 wrote a 600-page book on the history of swastikas. I will not, you will be relieved to know, recite those 600 pages at this point, nor will I go into all the details, but I will show you 3 slides to give you a glimpse that there is a story that most of us don't know. Here is a 32 version list of swastikas, and those are the first 2 are simply the ones that we all know, and that also come at the beginning of that 72 signs of the Armenians, yes. And this one, you will recall, we saw when we were looking in chapter 1, and this one we just analyzed, and we saw that one of them is right here in Patan on the way to the central square. And this is that S that forms the Kolovrat that we found also on the Villa of the Mysteries, and also on jars in Etruscan, and also on manuscripts in France. So this 32 set of symbols is already like a codex of something much bigger. However, this is the schoolboy version. There is also a version of 72 swastikas, and you can see that there is a bigger story. And here's a version with 107 swastikas. And if you then recall that we had the Ugunskrusts, where we started with 2, a backwards and a forward one, and that we generated then all those extraordinary fire symbols, then we realized, wait a moment, we've just forgotten about 9/10 or 99% of the story. We remember a backward and a forward one, but if I asked most children, give me 107 types of swastikas or 104 kind of swastikas, they'd fail. Now, look for 1 second at this one. Remember my lecture on the weaving? And I showed you curious symbols like this one with like a vesica Pisces, but now with square symbols rather than round ones. And then these symbols, yes? And so the symbols that were used in the north are now linked with a kolovrat, and kolovrat is the passage of the sun. And so underlying that thing that linked them with the signs of the zodiac are also links, deeper links with the sun, and a kind of hidden, knotty, spelled K-N-O-T-T-Y, cosmology. Well, here are is a Razi chakra with the letters that we saw, and here are 2 versions of the Armenian, 17,000 BC and 5,000 BC. Here the swastika is going this way, and then it's reversed. And these are both with relationship to QU or QE. Now I come back. It's now inviting you to take all that we've been saying and look at some of these things in fresh ways. So let's just look at the nakshatras and link them with numbers and letters. So I'll take nakshatras 1, 10, and 17. Well, in the old system, that's Ashvini, Magha, Mula. So the wife of the Ashvins, the bountiful, and the root. If I do that in terms of letters and gematria of the West, it's 1, 20, and 80, which gives me 101. In terms of the Greek alphabet, that would be AKR. If I do it with Cyrillic, it again gives me AKR, except now it would be Azukako Riki. And here you see the equivalent nakshatras drawn as star systems. If I take the nakshatras 1, 11, and 21, I get Asvini, Purva, Falguni, and Uttara Ashada. So the wife of the Ashvins, the first reddish one, and the second of the Ashada. And that gives me ALPH in Greek, the Alph of Alpha. And if I do that in Cyrillic, I get Azu, Liudu, and Furtu, which again gives me Alph. I now link 1, 12, and 17, which gives me Ashvini, Uttara, Falguni, and Mula. And I get Aleph, Lamed, Fu, or Fe. And remember Aleph, Fu? Or I get AMR, Alpha, Mu, Rho, which gives me a gematria of 140, 100. And so simple combinations of letters or of geometry give me sets of nakshatras, give me sets of number symbolism, and letters of alphabet, and different ways of writing alpha. So looking at this as a whole, we see we're linking the nakshatras with letters. And so if I take 1, 11, and 21, I get Alph. If I link 1, 12, and 17, I get Alephu. And if in another version of that alphabet, I link 1, 10, and 19, that gives me gematria 1, 10, 100, which gives me 111. And I get Aleph, Yod, Kopf, or AIT, or Alpha, Iota, Tau in Greek. Now, if I take and remember this 1, 10, 19 was the one that we saw in the systems, one that gives us the sequence of the planets, and that is the secret of the structure of the Arabic alphabet as well. If I now take the 6th letter in that sequence, 6, 15, 21, yes, I get the 3 points of Rahu. And so letters 6, 15, 21 in Greek give me a gematria of 660, 600, which is 666. And if I look at what those letters symbolize, well, the S is in the form of Draco, the snake. This looks like an E, and this looks like S. If I read it as a single word, it's sex. And here is the same thing in Russia with Zeloxi-Ka. So these become the symbols, or the letters corresponding to Rahu, become letters associated with evil and Satan and the bad. Why? Because these are linked with the points where the moon and the sun meet, and they cause the eclipses. And so the eclipses become a symbol of moral turpitude and of evil, and get linked to letters which then have to be abandoned. So stigma gets thrown out of the alphabet and other letters get replaced. And the swastika recurs as letter 30 in Tibetan, 24 in Georgian, 12 in Unani in North Africa, and as letter 7 in the Ugaritic Old Arabic alphabet. Here I show you the Georgian one in context, and here I show you the Arabic one in context. Now that the use of Letters as geometrical figures within grids becomes extremely important in Russia. So here I take a cross, and that links a series of letters. Here I take a backward swastika, and it links a series of letters. Here I take a little normal cross and a St. Andrew's cross. I have a backward swastika this way, a backward swastika this way. I have a frontward swastika this way. And that leads to a whole series of combinations of letters. Or here I have a bogovnik on a mosaic in Israel, here in Russia, here in a French manuscript, here a slight variant in Armenian. Now bogovnik becomes a way of linking letters, as does its reverse, rodovnik. And then I can see that it could also link a series of numbers. Now, so I can take this symbol, and now life gets interesting. I go to the Church of Amiens. I look at the Church of Amiens on the floor, and I see a swastika. I see a swastika as a dark symbol, and here as a light symbol. But now I look in more detail at that, and I realize that the form around it is this one. So this is the figure ground story again of my earlier lecture, that this, when put into a framework, starts to create light and dark swastikas. Here is letter 44 of the that alphabet that looks like Sanskrit, the Karuna, and here, which is Zemlya, which is the word for earth, and here now we take a grid of 7 by 7 and treat it as if it were in such a form. Or I can take a 7 by 7 grid or a 5 by 5 grid and now join lines 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I create a star. And so, which then links up with certain numbers. So I can have my grid, I can color certain ones, and then create sequences within that grid. I can do the same in Sanskrit, in Glagolithic, and here in the Sarvatobhadra chakra, here in the Cyrillic grid, and again in the Sarvatobhadra chakra, where I link this with names of gods and letters of alphabets. We remember this shape, which is the Hagel rune. I combine the points and I have a square seen isometrically. I make circles around there and I have a circle and 6 circles. And then I add another, so I have 1, 6, and 12 circles, which gives me 19 again. And then on the basis of that, I can create my regular solids. So I can start with this. I can join the points and have my 6-pointed star. I can do this and I have this rune. I can make the rune this way. I can inscribe it in 4 squares, or this way, or this way. Or I can do it this way. I can make a rune out of that. I can make it into these letters and then variations on those letters. And here are 2 Russian alphabet books, and we see various associations of that. But this Hagel rune that can create a square or a cube also becomes a way of, we don't have just a mudra for a single letter or a body motion for a single letter. I can have a series of about 20 movements to imitate that shape. So the shape is something that can be reduced to a motion, but it can also be a series of motions that gives me a whole morning's exercises. Or I can just make one mudra to show the basic principle. And so we see a very curious to and froing. Here is a symbol. I take it apart and I have 4 Fs backwards in the 4 directions. I have this, I have 4 Fs in the normal directions. I have this, I take it apart and I have 4 Gs backwards. I have this and I have 4 Gs in the sense of gammas going this way. Or these, I have this symbol or this symbol or this symbol or this symbol and this symbol. It comes from a grid of a swastika. Or I take this symbol and I see it here. I see that this is the symbol for essence, which is very close to the letter IY in Sanskrit in the early version. That comes there. Here I see it represented as a letter in a regular alphabet. Or I start with these men, which becomes this symbol profound, which I see here, and becomes then these symbols as letters. Or this one, which becomes newly, becomes the new form of the sun, and there. Or I have this H-like symbol with an extra, with a hat on, and I see that as hair. Or I see this symbol, the Q as in quick, which becomes more, pronounced also car. Here it is in context. Here I see it again, QU, car. This is the car of Karashat. Here you see it in another version. Here you see that it links with the symbol of the swastika, which is your letter Pa or Fa in Sanskrit, and it links with the letter Pe in that early Russian thing, and it links with these 2 symbols, which are early symbols of the ruble. So we go from an Armenian letter to a Greek letter, to a Sanskrit letter, to a Russian letter, and then Russian currency, all connected at a deeper level. Or this symbol that we examined, I think in lecture 9, which is this P linked with 19, which is again life, and we see that that links with the chi, rho, so the X, P, or the first 2 letters. Well, the P that is actually an R in Greek, and is the symbol of Christ. And then here in the symbol of the Eastern Roman Empire, where the P as an R, and then the X is there. Or this symbol, which we read in Armenian, is the cosmos. Here it is the cross Gergity, and we see it then in context. Or here we take 1 bit of the swastika, that becomes the snake again. Zelo in this case, that becomes the letter stigma in Greek. That becomes the S that reverses, which is of course the dragon that becomes the serpent in the sky. And here are then variants. So we have contrast then between above and below, life and death, light and darkness, man and ear, man rune and vipe rune, spirit and matter, theanism and demonism. Or I take this symbol, I align it with the Big Dipper, and I create this, and then that links with a mudra, and then I link with that, and it becomes that, and it becomes that. Or here I take that symbol, which is again your Haggal rune, which becomes star 15, which links again to the Ze, or it becomes the Samek rune. Here it is again as a Russian letter, and here it is as a decoration. Or I have this figure, becomes that, becomes that, becomes that, becomes that, and is linked again with this, and takes us back to our spiral movement. Or here, which I showed you in the 12th chapter, Slovo, a letter, which you would call the Bindu, linking with two circles, then two circles with two E's, one this way and that way. This is est, meaning it is, and then I add a T on top, and it's Tverdo, so I have the first four letters of the alphabet. I do those two circles alone, and it's Vede, from which you get Veda. And then I take bits and pieces of this, and I combine them in this way. I produce these letters, and then I have variants of Veda. Or I take this and make a geometrical form, and I have this. Here I'm in Georgian. Here I'm in Armenian. And needless to say, you can see the link with the first letter A of Sanskrit as well. So the way I draw it links me to different alphabets and different letters. Or I can start with Tengri, make letters at each of those. I can create a flag. I can create this. I can put it into a grid, and then take one, and it becomes the Algiz rune. Or I can take this symbol in the earliest of the alphabets, that becomes this symbol, then it becomes the Chinese one and the Japanese wen, and then Russian letters. And I can isolate these. Now we're back at the first page of the book, and then the male and the female, and seeing how that links up. And then variants of that lead me to a yogi figure and a yogi figure upside down, to these variations in letters. This is bu, this is go, and here is another letter. Now I take you back to the earliest version of the that old Russian alphabet. I take this, I take that, beta, beta, B, B, and we've got a normal letter. Or I take go. This is the mudra for the whole body. This is the mudra for a finger. That leads me to this, leads me to this, leads me to this. So we're crossing languages. We're going from Russian to Sanskrit to English, and yet we see that the notion of linking signs, symbols, and letters is connected. And so I can create the 22 motions linked with 22 motions of the body. I can link them to half motions of the body and create the letters of Hebrew. And in fact, I can create whole mudra systems or hand mudra systems, which then become the basics of creating all of the runes by this way or this way. And this applies not only in the north of Europe. If I go to Japan, I see that I can take a grid again, I can make a mudra, and I can make a Japanese letter. I can take a hand symbol, make a Japanese letter. And here are a whole series of them. Here again, a whole series of them. And these hand seals are linked now with the zodiac. Here I have the Chandra Namaskar and the Surya Namaskar. Here is another version of the Chandra Namaskar. I invite you to look specifically at these two. My colleague Jaya was wearing it this morning on her dress. Here you see it again, and here you see this man doing it in the center. That symbol comes up here as a letter, which we see here as the letter Ha in Old Arabic. And it's the basis of what I call the candelabrum man. Now, the letter 37 in the Old Chinese alphabet is this one. One of the early Chinese signs is this one. Now we have Armenian signs, African signs, and again African symbols. And here around the world, some of the variants. Here is the letter Gaupi in Syriorum. Here we are in ancient Hebrew, and we can see that it links to these. Now we're back to the goddess pose, the Devi Asana, and the Utkata Konasana. To show you the modern version, here's the Harvard Business Review of Davenport, which seems very modern until we realize that he's just doing a Chandrasana. Or I can take this symbol and show you that that links to a Russian pose, which becomes a Russian letter, which becomes that Russian letter becomes that. And now we go back to the letter-making processes of the Russians. So we have this notion that the spiral from which we began the conference, those 4 spirals are part of Svati. But within that spiral, there are spirals. And that spirals creates then Yav, Prav, Yav, and Nav, the 3 worlds. If you look at early Hebrew letter making, you will find spirals all over the place. And that swastika that goes upwards is linked here. And there it is. There's a Hindu one. And here are old ones this is the Zionist flag, and this is the modified Israeli flag. This is the word. These are 2 words. This is vita, or life, and this is active. So active life, and I combine them and I get oat. Or I take that and do the opposite and combine those and I get that. Or I flip them and I get that. And you can see that this flipping gets me also back to the graph of paragraph. Well, we had that symbol of the male. I turn it upside down and I get that. That gives me this and that. I link them in this way and I get that. I link them in this way, I get that. I now have my human being. I now do yet a further thing, and I have this, I have this, I have this, I have this. And so by just turning and flipping, I start not just with a spiral, but I have a spiral of life that is the spiral of creating the alphabets. And in a moment, I'll show you how that is visualized in a Russian video. Thank you. So to explain to you the underlying principles of this process, I take you to a Russian video. There is an audio in Russian, which I have muted, and I'll simply give you a rough commentary for the moment in English, and then if you're fluent in Russian or wish to study it in detail, you can look at the video on your own. This is the second of a multi-part series explaining the origin of letters. So here we have vita and active. We put them together and we get this letter, which we would call a W, but it's an ot. Then I do it a little more and I get this version of a W. Now I take that and mirror it, and I get this, which is mislete, or the M. And then I put those 2 together and I get shivete and mo, depending on how I combine them. And then I take this, which is dete, and I do this, and it becomes yesm. And I do this, and it becomes liude. And I do this, and I get that form uk, which we saw as the essence of the male. And now I put them in this way, and I get B, and I put them this way, and I get share. And I combine them in another way, and I get this. And then I combine them in another way, and I'm back to my Ribnal Husb, or Star of Lakshmi. Or I combine this and this and this and this, and I get this, 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 this. So it becomes, and I get my little man, and the little man turns into different figures. And on the basis of that, I can create the simplified alphabet, and then, of course, I can create the whole of the alphabet. Well, this is a subset of that complicated alphabet that I showed you in the introduction. Perhaps this is enough to give you the general idea. So that little man, that is the kind of the leitmotif and highlighted on the cover of my book, leads you to these figures. And then what we see is a parallel development. So on the one hand, we create symbols. And here you see your Chandra Namaskar as a mini symbol. Here again, I can reduce it to mudras for the hands. And I can also write this as a series of letters in symbol form or as letter form. And here is a bit of that big alphabet where those bits, there is the little man in context, here is the G in context, the energy version, and then the mudra version. Here is the spiral. If I do the spiral downwards, I have Zemlya, which is the meaning of earth. Here I see Mother Earth with a snake around her, so we're back to the Nagas symbolism. And then I do it this version, and it looks like a 3, and this is what it looks like in the modern alphabet. Now, most people that see the modern alphabet just think it's an abstract letter. If you go to a wiki, it'll tell you that they don't know where this comes from, but if you look at this, it's quite clear where it comes from. And so when I talked in the initial introduction about the need for a dictionary of letters, I'm not just talking about making a dictionary of this. We should have a dictionary that works in the sense of an app that shows me the whole history of how that goes back to that, goes back to that, goes back to that. And we could do the same then. Well, here's yet another version that shows you the symbol version, and then writes that symbol out, and then writes it as a letter. And you'll see here that in Armenian, that's the symbol for reborn. So here we are on the day after the resurrection, or 2 days after the resurrection. So it's the earth that is reborn as this. And here is the version that shows you the 4 directions. Yes, there it is there. And then it turns into the regular letter. Or this bird becomes the symbol for the cosmos. Then you get all of these combinations, and then it becomes a grid system for making letters. Or a series of these birds become various kinds of letters in the Tamga tradition. Here you see the bird abstracted to an O with an E on its side. There with a value of 800. There you see it as a normal letter. And here you see 3 versions of it. Now the Hebrews then take a simple thing like the Star of Vishnu, called Star of David and Solomon, and use that to create a grid system for their whole alphabet. So I'm suggesting to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the process of letter making goes through at least 3 stages. At a very early stage, probably around 11,000 BC, according to the Russians, there was a 3-dimensional type of letter making that involved spirals. That then got simplified so that people took the products and linked them to the 4 points of the compass and created 4-sided symbols. Those 4-sided symbols got chopped off so that on the one hand they could become individual letters. In some cases they became the same symbol in 4 different directions, which we saw with the Chechen alphabet. And then we use grids to create a simplified form of letter making. This Hebrew one is one example, and we've seen other examples in the course of the book. So here is yet another version of that Hebrew approach. But here we see Russian ones using a single cube or isometric cube, where the cube itself, as we saw, was the Haggal rune, yes? Or here 2 cubes, or here 8 times 8 cubes. Or here in this version. Now some of these we've seen before, but this one you haven't seen before. Now we have 4 cubes, but now as literally 4 cubes, and the symbol, or here the Haggal, is inside of those cubes. Or here we see it being imposed on a transparent version of 4 cubes. Or here we see yet another alternative. And here we see now a 2D version of those cubes for making those letters. And then we just use a square as if there were no cube, and use that for making letters here in Latin and English, here in Georgian, here in French, and here again in English. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the final course in how you make letters, but it is a quick view of showing you how this complex thing of linking letters, numbers, geometry, and using that on the one hand to create letter systems, and on the other hand to explain the whole of the cosmos, is intimately connected. Thank you very much.